The drill in Docking Annex 12 was supposed to take 40 minutes. I know because I read the schedule twice, the way I read every schedule at Austrinvale. Because nobody there had yet learned that reading the schedule twice was a habit and not a nervous tic. Austrinvale Combined Fleet Academy trained in what it called the Emergency Systems track, which sounded, on the enrollment forms I'd filled out from a recruiting station outside Denver, like something close enough to what I already knew. It wasn't, not exactly. The Corv and I didn't run drills to build reflexes. They ran them to prove a doctrine could hold. Every cadet I trained beside had grown up inside sequence the way I'd grown up inside a dispatch radio, as background noise that told you the world was still ordered, still answering to something. They didn't question it any more than I'd questioned the dispatch tones as a kid. It had simply always been there, and it had never yet been wrong. 40 minutes, seal the annex, drop pressure in stages, 5 cadets behind 5 doors, evacuate in sequence. That last word carried weight at Austrinvale the way rank carried weight anywhere else. The Corv and I built their fleet on order. Not chain of command exactly, more like liturgy. Every door in that academy had a number stenciled above it, and every number meant something about who you were and when you were permitted to move. Door 1 evacuated first, always. Door 5 evacuated last, always. It didn't matter what was happening behind door 5. I was door 4. Cadet Oyaleran Vess was door 5, and 11 minutes into a 40-minute drill, a coolant coupling behind his door failed for real. I heard it before I understood it. A flat crack through the hull plating, then the annex klaxon changing pitch, the particular rising tone that meant the simulation had stopped being a simulation. The Corv and I instructor monitoring the drill, a broad-shouldered proctor named Aunt Ravel Sohn, froze at his console, with his resonance chamber going still and silent, which for a Corv and I is the equivalent of a held breath. He was waiting for the sequence protocol to resolve itself. Doors evacuate in sequence. Door 1 first. Aunt Ravel Sohn was not going to be the one who broke it. I'd spent 8 years before the academy running incident command on a metro ambulance service, the kind of job where you learn triage the way you learn to walk. Not from a manual, from 1,005 a.m. calls where the manual didn't apply. Triage doesn't ask who's assigned first. It asks who's dying first. I looked at the annex readouts, door 5's oxygen curve dropping like a stone, door 3's holding steady, door 1's cadet standing there with his arms crossed, bored, waiting his sanctioned turn. And I did the thing that 8 years of ambulance work had made automatic and that 4 months at Austrinvale had apparently not yet trained out of me. I broke sequence. I went to the emergency overrides, keyed door 5 open first, then door 4, myself, then 3, then looped back for 1 and 2, who could wait because their numbers weren't lying to them the way door 5's numbers were. I pulled Vess out by the harness, his suit already frosting at the seams, and got him breathing again on the annex floor, while Aunt Ravel Sohn stood over both of us making a sound I hadn't heard from a Corvinai before, a stuttering, arrhythmic hum, like his resonance chamber didn't have a note prepared for what it was witnessing. All 5 cadets lived. Vess kept 2 fingers on his left hand that a straight sequence evacuation would have cost him along with roughly 90 more seconds of exposure his body wouldn't have survived. He lost feeling in the hand anyway, permanently. From the frost that got there first. I don't tell that part to make the ending prettier. It happened. I carried it out of that annex along with everything else. 4 days later I was summoned to the 9th Order review. The council chamber sat 3 levels below the instruction floors, no holograms, a long raised table, a single chair for whoever stood accused of disordering something. Behind the table sat 5 convocation members and, at its center, Proctor Marshal Kavrena Osteral, whose resonance chamber I'd never once heard raised above a formal register. Beside her sat the chime bar, a slim iron rod on a stand, struck once to grant a speaker their turn, struck again to close it. Nobody spoke out of turn in that room. Nobody had, in the recorded history of the academy, needed to be told twice. Cadet Achebe, Osteral said, and the bar rang once, granting her the floor. You are here because you disordered an evacuation sequence in progress. 5 cadets are alive who might otherwise have died in a controlled and orderly fashion. The convocation finds this troubling regardless of outcome. I waited for the bar to strike again before I answered, because that was the rule, and because I had learned by then that patience read to the Corvinai as respect, and respect was the only currency I had in that room. I triaged by clinical priority, I said, when it rang for me. Door 5's cadet had the worst oxygen curve on the board. I moved him first. Everyone else followed by need, not number. Sequence exists, said a junior board member, a narrow Corvinai with a stripe of pale ridging down his jaw, because need is a matter of interpretation. Order is not. Door 5's oxygen curve wasn't an interpretation, I said. It was a number on your own console. I read the number the room was already giving you. That drew no reply, only the low arrhythmic hum I'd heard from Aunt Ravelson in the annex. Quieter here, spread thin across 5 throats instead of 1. Osterol let it pass without comment, which for her was its own kind of statement. A second board member, older, her jaw ridging faded to a dull gray that I'd since learned marked seniority rather than illness, leaned forward when the bar rang for her. "You are aware," she said, "that sequence has governed evacuation procedure at this institution for 161 years without incident." "I'm aware it's governed it for 161 years without a failure like this one," I said, and waited through the pause that followed. The kind of pause I'd learned meant the room was deciding whether that was insolence or arithmetic. "Those aren't the same claim." Nobody corrected me. The bar rang to close my turn, and the silence that followed it had a different weight than the ones before. They didn't ask me to justify myself with feeling, and I didn't offer any. I described the annex readouts in the order I'd read them. I described the harness release, the count I'd used on Vess's chest, the number of seconds I estimated Door 1's cadet could safely wait, and why. I did not raise my voice. I did not apologize, because 8 years of triage work teaches you that an apology for a correct call is just noise standing between the room and the facts, and the Corvini, whatever else they were, respected facts delivered without noise. At the end of it, Osterel did something I hadn't expected. She ordered the board's own analysts to run the sequence doctrine evacuation as written, Door 1 through Door 5, no deviation, against the annex's recorded failure timeline, to demonstrate for the record what proper procedure would have produced. They ran it twice, because the first result was assumed to be an instrument error. It wasn't. Strict sequence, doors opening in their assigned order with no override, put 3 cadets past survivable exposure before their doors ever reached them. Door 5's cadet, Vess, did not survive the model at all. The simulation the convocation had commissioned to prove I should have waited had instead demonstrated, with their own instruments and their own doctrine, that waiting killed 3 of the 5 people I'd pulled out alive. The chamber went still in a way I hadn't heard from a room full of Corvini before. Osterol reached for the chime bar to close the proceeding, the way she'd closed every speaking turn that afternoon, and the bar didn't ring. I watched her strike it a second time, harder, and it still gave nothing. Some fault in the housing, someone said later, though nobody in that room believed it was a fault. 5 members of a species built on ritual order sat in a chamber where the instrument that governed whose turn it was to speak had simply gone silent, because for the first time in the recorded history of that room, the doctrine and the data had disagreed, and neither side had a script for what came next. Osterol set the bar down without striking it again. "The convocation will reclassify the incident," she said, "pending review of sequence doctrine itself." It wasn't an acquittal. It wasn't a commendation. It was a Corvini institution admitting, in the only language it had, that it did not currently possess a category for what I'd done. "Cadet Achabe," she said, "do you have anything further to add?" I thought about Vess's hand, the 2 fingers he kept and the feeling he didn't. I thought about the arrhythmic hum, the silent bar, the 3 cadets a straight sequence would have buried and the 5 who'd walked out instead. "Only that I'd wait for the chime again," I said. "I just wouldn't wait for the door." Nobody struck the bar to close it. Nobody needed to. The room simply, finally let me go.